Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Here we go. Let's get some W's in the chat, folks.
What we cut was auto theft. That's right. We cut auto theft by 50% under the previous common sense Conservative government. And he's right. We did it at a lower cost to taxpayers. And he's also right that he reversed our reduction in auto theft because it has exploded by 32% since he took office, just as the bureaucracy has exploded. He has not put it into frontline officers. In fact, at the Port of Montreal, there's only 5 of them to inspect 500,000 containers, only 1% of which get inspected. Why won't he price consultants and bureaucrats and get boots on the ground?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It would be more credible what the Leader of the Opposition was saying if he hadn't voted against sending $121 million to the province of Ontario to fight against organized crime and car theft. If he hadn't announced that he's voting against our fight against money laundering. Mr. Speaker, he still has time to change his perspectives and get behind our initiative to fight organized crime, to fight auto theft, and to stand up for Canadians. He cut thousands of jobs under his previous government from border services. We've invested in them, and we will continue to.
He still has time to change his mind.
The Honourable Member, Leader of the Opposition.
That's
Say it softly and slowly so the Prime Minister can understand.
Okay, here we go.
We cut auto theft by 50%.
That's right.
By half. Yes, while reducing the cost of the bureaucracy. And yes, we're voting against him putting hundreds of millions of dollars more into high-priced consultants and back-office bureaucrats that don't stop crime. My common sense plan will scan every container going out of the 4 biggest ports and put 75 border agents to do the inspections on the ground. Why can't we have more boots on the ground and fewer bureaucrats in offices?
Let's go!
The Right Honourable.
Holy shit.
He talks about boots on the ground, but the government he was part of, that he's taking credit for now, actually cut thousands of jobs of boots on the ground at the Canada Border Services Agency. We've continued to step up to support Canadians. They like to mention C5. It is a bill that kept mandatory minimum penalties for car thefts on the books. They mention C75, which is a bill that raised maximum penalties on car theft. We're going to continue to invest in fighting money laundering, and we hope, and organized crime, and we hope that the Conservatives change their mind and vote with us to crack down on organized crime.
You are the money launderer, you fucking idiot.
I'm going to ask all members to restrain themselves as they can listen to the questions and to the answers.
Holy shit,
Leader
folks.
of the Opposition.
He's hiked the cost, and he's hiked the crime. He's not worth the cost, and he's not worth the crime after 8 years. He's also not worth the hypocrisy. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been claiming for months that he had no involvement in or knowledge of the invitation of a former Nazi soldier to the visit of the Ukrainian president. Now we know that he personally invited that same individual. He actually said the opposite. And he said that the former speaker had to resign over doing the exact same thing.
Yep.
He hold himself to the very same standard and admit that he's not fit for office.
Wow! Get your I did not see that coming sticker. Link in the description, folks.
Prime Minister.
Tax that the Leader of the Opposition is choosing to make against the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress demonstrates the extent to which this Conservative Party no longer stands with Ukraine. In just a few minutes, Mr. Speaker, to stand and vote in favor of a free trade deal that Volodymyr Zelensky himself is asking.
He almost said Putin.
And he is choosing to not stand with Ukraine, not stand with Ukrainians, and not stand with Ukrainian Canadians. Why are they abandoning Ukraine?
They're not, dude. Conservatives are more pro-Ukraine than liberals.
The Liberal government, the Prime Minister promised to tax the excess profits of corporate grocery stores if they fail to stabilize grocery prices. Well, they failed to stabilize prices, and the Liberals again broke their promise. The Liberals announced instead another study on food prices. Canadians don't need another study to know that they're being gouged by corporate greed. It turns out we've learned the Liberal housing minister received thousands of dollars in donations from none other than the Sobeys family. Is that why they're protecting their wealthy friends?
All he talks about is grocery store CEOs.
More competition means lower prices, more choice, and more innovative products and services for Canadians. Our government has just passed new legislation that empowers the Competition Bureau to hold grocers accountable and prioritize consumers' interests. The fall economic statement also cracks down on predatory pricing, and I urge all parties to vote in favour of that. Canadians are watching and counting on each and every single one of us in this House of Commons to keep supporting them.
After months of feigned outrage and apologies on behalf of everyone else, a new report
she looks
by
sharp
the Globe
today.
and Mail shows that the Prime Minister's office invited a Nazi to his diplomatic reception in Toronto. He blamed the Speaker, saying that he acted alone. He's saying he had no idea about any of it. He called for him to take responsibility. He watched him resign, and yesterday he tried to blame the Ukrainian Congress. After all of the embarrassment all over the world, why is he above the rules that he applies to everyone else?
There you go, Melissa.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about is some name that came from a...
Look at Trudeau's stupid face, dude.
Obviously, the Prime Minister had no knowledge. Is happening over here. We are voting today at third reading on the Canada-Ukraine free trade arrangement. Mr. Zelensky stood there and asked us to pass this. Opposition to this bill is a moral failing of historic proportions in response to an effort to support our friends in Ukraine and repel the Russian invaders.
That has nothing to do with what the question was.
Embarrassment it must be for the House Leader to have to clean up the Prime Minister's mess every day.
Oh!
Had the Prime Minister's name on it, it came from him, and for months he said only the Speaker invited him. It turned out not to be true. His own House Leader said that the invitation merited a Speaker's resignation. The Speaker resigned because of him, and all of them watched him do it. So will the Prime Minister be subject to the rules that he imposes on everyone else?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Again, Mr. Speaker, another small conflagration to mask their larger historical moral failing of not supporting the people and the armed forces of Ukraine and the President stood in this very
This is so fucking dumb.
and asked us to support the Canada-Ukraine free trade arrangements. Then they voted against Operation Unifier and support for our troops that once again supports Ukraine. What is next, Mr. Speaker, and why will they not stop trying to hide their moral failings?
Shameful for inviting a Nazi into Parliament, you fucking idiots.
Experienced members of this House who do know that their time to speak will be recognized by the Chair when they are...
Will it be before or after the Nazi?
I ask you, please, to allow questions and to allow answers.
Oh shit, Trudeau left!
So that the Speaker can hear it and so can anybody else who's participating here.
Trudeau walked out. He left.
Charles Wood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that was a shameful answer from that member, Mr. Speaker. Another day, another...
It's embarrassing. Trudeau laughed. What a pussy.
After months of denial, throwing the former Speaker under the bus, now we learn that it was the Prime Minister who invited a Nazi to a reception with President Zelensky. He forced the Speaker to resign, to take the fall, so he could avoid responsibility and cling to power. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, he is not worth the cost to Canada's reputation. Why did the Prime Minister invite a Nazi to a reception with the Ukrainian Prime Minister?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
The community event was held with the President of Ukraine, to which over 1,000 people were invited. In fact,
you don't vet them?
Invited to that, Mr. Speaker. But we're not talking about any of that today because they care about this. They're pretending to care about this. This is fake outrage. Why? Because today we are voting on trade arrangements with one of our closest allies, the people in the country of Ukraine who are repelling as we speak and dying against Russian invaders. This is a moral failing of historic proportions, Mr. Speaker.
The biggest failing of historical proportions is Trudeau walking out when they're talking about the Nazi fucking invited.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a breakdown in law and order in this country. Over the last 8 years, auto thefts are up 34%, violent crime 39%. Canada has become a foreign interference playground for the PRC, for Iran, and for Russia. And behind all of this is organized crime, money laundering, and terrorist financing. In fact, in a U.S. indictment unsealed last week, Iran hired 2 Hells Angels members in British Columbia as assassins. When is this government going to get serious about crime in this country and start protecting Canadian citizens?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Canada.
Mr. Speaker, I've got a lot of respect for the member for Wellington Halton Hills, but I ask him to reflect seriously on the vote he's going to cast on the Fall Economic Statement. The Fall Economic Statement deals directly with the money laundering that is fueling organized crime. We know that auto theft and so many other crimes right now are being committed and orchestrated by organized criminals. We have the ability to get tough on their financing structures and break down those organizations. That member hopefully has the rectitude to address that issue and vote against his leader's instructions and vote in favor of the Fall Economic Statement.
The Honourable Member from Wellington Halton Hills.
All right, let's go.
Bill C-59 will do little to combat the problem of organized crime and money laundering in this country, which the government's own estimate says are $133 billion a year, equal to 5% of GDP. This government has ignored numerous reports and protected lawyers from money laundering and terrorist financing law, and failed to crack down on Canada's big banks and their funneling of money laundering and terrorist financing through our financial system. So when is the government going to subject lawyers to federal law and start cracking down on our big banks and the gobs of money laundering going through our financial system?
Oh, yeah, man.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Canada.
Mr. Speaker, again, I would ask that member to use the reason for which he is known in this chamber and reason and think about the votes that he is being asked to cast and the votes that he has already casted. What am I talking about, Mr. Speaker? We know that from police forces around this country, they are asking for resources. We've dedicated resources to guns and gangs, $121 million last week. Yet that member, under the guidance of his leader, was instructed to vote on an all-night voting session against guns and gangs funding. That is not becoming of that member nor of that caucus.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of soft on crime policies, this Prime Minister has created the auto theft crisis. According to the Liberal government's own news release, in New Brunswick, car thefts have spiked by 120%. It's time to stop the crime. Will the Prime Minister reverse his soft on crime, catch and release policies that have caused the auto theft crisis?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our government obviously takes the increase in auto theft extremely seriously.
Obviously not.
Invested in a very significant way in the Border Services Agency and the RCMP to work on organized crime. Mr. Speaker, when we formed the government, we found out that Conservatives had cut 1,000 officers from Border Services. That's a lot. And half of the Border Services officers that work on criminal intelligence to interdict the export of, for example, stolen vehicles. Good news, we reversed those cuts. We've invested more, and we're going to continue to do more to deal with this issue.
Not a single person believes that.
Mr. Speaker, the results are in after 8 years. There were 5 agents working at one port. 5 people. This Liberal government has let organized crime run rampant in Canada. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the crime. His reckless policies have caused an explosion in car thefts. He's responsible for the ports. He's responsible for the RCMP and the criminal code. These are federal responsibilities. Car thefts have spiked 190% in Moncton, 93% in St. John. Will this Prime Minister finally reverse his soft on crime catch and release policies?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure my colleague from Miramichi that what this government will continue to do is crack down on auto theft and organized crime. So they like fancy slogans where they make up little catch and release. He's from Miramichi, New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker. He knows that applies to salmon angling, not serious criminals. So just because he repeats the silly phrase doesn't make it true, Mr. Speaker.
You can go and steal a car, get arrested, and then be back in your house the same day.
We've invested in the CBS
in Canada.
And we'll continue to do more.
Speaker, let me remind this Prime Minister that he is responsible for the ports, the RCMP, the CBSA, and our criminal code. Canadians are paying $1 billion more in insurance premiums.
New guy?
Of skyrocketing
Is this new guy?
Theft claims.
We got a couple new guys. I forget who they are.
This auto theft crisis with bills like C-75 and C-5, which allow criminals to be on the streets the same day. Will this government reverse?
Can I get confirmation in the chat?
Replace them with our common sense plan of jail and not bail for repeat violent offenders?
Hear, hear. The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I want to stress that slogans and videos are not going to fix this very complex problem. Our approach...
Yeah, taxes aren't going to fix the problem either, buddy.
...to develop a complex solution. And I will say that in Bill C-75, the very...
She's got to look at her phone.
...legislation that the Leader of the Opposition is asking us to repeal, our government raised the maximum penalty on summary conviction for motor vehicle theft from 18 months to 2 years. So I ask, why does the Leader of the Opposition want to
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Millwood.
Oh, this guy do not mess around.
Car thefts have skyrocketed across the country, up 300% in Toronto, and
hey, did he lose weight?
In other Canadian countries. Car theft now costs the insurance industry over $1 billion a year, Mr. Speaker. That means that every Canadian is spending more every month for their insurance premiums. This Prime Minister has caused this auto theft crisis. His catch and release policies have allowed organized crime to thrive in this country. It's time to stop the crime, Mr. Speaker. When will the Prime Minister reverse his catch and release policies?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague from Edmonton Millwood for the question. The good news is on Thursday, representatives of the insurance industry will participate with auto manufacturers, people responsible for rail transportation, the ports, federal border services agents, the RCMP, provincial ministers responsible. Their police chiefs, Mr. Speaker, will be here because we think if we're going to do the work that Canadians expect us to do on this important issue and our government's committed to doing, we need to do it in partnership with all of the people that my colleague referred to. Good news, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we're doing.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Edmonton Millwoods.
You can hear Chrystia Freeland in the background.
Criminals are continuing to steal cars. After 8 years of this NDP Liberal soft on crime policies, our police forces are powerless to stop car thieves. Liberal B's C5 allows house arrest for these criminals, and C75 allows repeat offenders to be released on bail just hours after they were arrested. This Prime Minister has caused this crisis, and he's not worth the cost, Mr. Speaker. When will he reverse his soft on crime policies that has caused this auto theft crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General for Canada.
You're entitled to your own opinion.
Holy shit, bro. Wait till they announce you first.
Mentioned, maintained a mandatory minimum penalty for auto theft. That's what they apparently want to repeal. Bill C-75, which he just mentioned, actually enhanced the maximum penalty for auto theft, moving it from 18 months to 2 years less a day. That apparently is what they want to repeal. You don't fix this problem by suggesting redundant changes that already exist in the...
Can you stay in the camera frame, guy?
Being the adults in the room, convening people, and coming up with a complex solution to a complex problem.
Oh, he's triggered.